All right. It is Tuesday morning, cliffcentral.com, and here we are. Kicking some ass first thing in the morning, which is a nice way to wake up. We've got Mash, we've got, he's in the studio in Joburg, and we've got Rebellious Ruth, who is a regular on the show. She is one of our main commentators. She's also not at all afraid to voice her own opinion about a bunch of things. So she probably gets into a lot of trouble with friends and family and colleagues and all kinds of other people too. But that doesn't bother us.
It's the way to be. It's the way to be.
Yeah. So Ruth and I have a couple of things in common. She is from Pretoria. She likes to entertain people, makes people laugh. She's Josh, like me. You know, I'm Josh, sort of. And she likes to talk about philosophy, thought-provoking subjects. Her views tend to be rather more conservative than completely liberal, but she doesn't care what you do as long as you don't do harm to yourself or to animals or to others, which to me sounds like pretty much the definition of a good person, you know? I don't believe these people who walk around saying how good they are good people. I think the people who are good people are the ones who just don't do harm to other people. That's all.
Absolutely.
It's that simple, right?
Gotta be. Absolutely.
All right. So, Mash, how's your day going? Any crazy adventures out of the weekend? Because we know people love those. Mash always has some terrible story about something really weird that only happened to him over the weekend. Anything this weekend?
Well, Gareth, this weekend, rather on Friday. Friday actually set the tone for my whole weekend. Let's start off there. And on Friday, we went to the Cannabis Expo, Simpiwe, Aaron, and I. And we were like, listen, let's go see what's going on here. What's popping here in these Cannabis Expo sections of life? And we got there. It was a vibe. We bought a couple of things. And there was lots of samples. That is where the danger is. If you wanted to know where the danger is, it's by the samples. Because some of these people were so polite. They were so polite. They were like, hey, have some. And everything there was infused. So we were just tasting everything. Well, I was tasting everything. And I was just, can I have another one? These people weren't even stopping me at these little booths. They were like, yeah, you could. Yeah. I'm like, is another one going to kill me? They're like, no, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. Have another one. Have 10 if you want to. Some other lady was like, listen, here's a whole biscuit. Eat the whole damn biscuit. Some big biscuit. And I ate the biscuit. And I just want to say, I regretted it, number one. But not only for Friday evening, but until Sunday. I was baked until Sunday.
Baked.
Well, yeah, you remember, I don't know if either of you do, but we did a show once where I think Ben and Flax and I can't even remember who was with us at the time. I think Sia was also there on that show where we had these guys come in and they gave us edibles, right?
Ooh.
And like little gummy bears and things, but they obviously were full of weed. And we were a disaster but not, as you say, Mash, not for just like one day. It felt like to me that it lasted forever. It just was not going away. And I could not get out of this weird, paranoid, ugly high. And as a result, I have sworn off. And I know it's not fair, so don't lecture me. But I just never will do edibles ever again. It fucked my whole day up on that Friday and the whole weekend afterwards. You know, it's amazing because you don't feel it immediately. So you think, oh, well, obviously not working. I'll try some more. And then you do some more.
Yes.
And you're basically like a, what would you even call you? A zombie.
Yeah. You become,
but
this is the thing with life. In all things, we need guidance, right? Like, I believe school wasn't the right guidance for anyone who is coming into, like, the real world.
Yes, no one tells you this at school.
Not even the weed thing. Like, you need guidance about tax. You need guidance about so many other things. And with edibles, you can't. That's the trick with them. They think, oh, it's doing nothing. Let me take like 3. The next thing, you're taking 48 hours just to recover. So, people, you want to try edibles? Slowly.
No,
Slowly.
edibles are not for amateurs, and I'm very proud of you guys for going to the Cannabis Expo. You know what I like about Simpiwe and Ryan and Mash is that they do all the stuff. They go to events. They're not afraid to accept an invitation. They go along. They usually all go together, and they've got each other's backs because you never know these things. What kind of creeps are hanging around? Anyway, they get in hook, line, and sinker, and then poor Mash. So you were basically like a man down laboratory, grade guinea pig.
I was just like, yo, I don't know how I'm even getting home. I don't know. What if this cops? What is this? And I was so paranoid. I was just
Did you drive?
I was able to drive. I did
Oof.
actually eat. I ate a lot. And then I actually started feeling better. I think it's called munchies. And
Yeah.
I ate quite a bit, started feeling better. I had some cold drink as well. And before I knew it, I was still kind of not so well, but I'd recovered enough to drive home. So that's good. That's a good start to my weekend.
Well done. I mean, listen, well done. You only live once. You've got to do these things, but I think you only do that with edibles once. You won't make that mistake again.
Yes, I will not make that mistake.
It's something I will never do again. And I know people say, "Oh no, but you've got to do it in the right situation with the right people." I know all of that. That makes sense. But once bitten, twice shy. It's not going to happen again.
Absolutely.
So well done for going, well done for doing it. But I feel sorry for you.
As you should, because I was a mess. I still am kind of a mess, actually.
Hey, Ruth, I see that you are also, like a lot of people who've been emailing me lately, you're watching this Ancient Apocalypse, which is Graham Hancock's new show on Netflix. It is so good. I'm on episode 4, I think it is. I'm up to like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. And wow. All right, so let me explain in case you don't know what this is, because you might be listening to us now going, what are these people speaking in hieroglyphs? There is a terrific show. I don't know if you know who Graham Hancock is. He's of course an author. I read his first book, Fingerprints of the Gods, in 1995, which was, I was still at high school. And I remember reading this book because he basically explained that the pyramids weren't the tombs of 3 pharaohs that were built 5,000-6,000 years ago. He said that's not possible. They are aligned to the cardinal points of the earth, north, south, east, and west. They line up perfectly with the belt of Orion, as it must have been some 12,000 years ago. That there are things about these pyramids which are just inexplicable, that would not have been part of the planning for just an elaborate tomb, even the most elaborate tomb. And he went into this book. He co-wrote Fingerprints of the Gods with a guy called Robert Bauval. I'm not sure what happened to Robert Bauval, but the two of them wrote these books, and there was a sequel to that. And they were all superb. And I remember getting into it and thinking, wow, this makes a lot of sense. The basic hypothesis of Graham Hancock's whole life's work, I hate to reduce anyone's life's work to a couple of sentences, but the idea here is that before the last global ice age, when much of the planet was covered in ice and humans were really threatened as a species, there wasn't a lot of good going on among, our ancestors. It was a very, very tough time. And what was particularly horrible for them is the fact that there was so little of the earth that was habitable. It was cold. The sea levels had risen by a lot, a considerable amount. Not like when Al Gore told us that Venice would be underwater by now, back in the 90s, and it obviously isn't. I mean, if you're going to believe Graham Hancock, then you should disregard fucking Al Gore. I mean, he can go and suck a bag of dicks. He really is. And he's the same guy who claimed to have invented the internet, remember? This was the former vice president of the United States. Bill Clinton's 2IC, who couldn't even win after Clinton was basically outed as the world's biggest pervert, sticking cigars into Monica Lewinsky. Even then, Al Gore couldn't manage to pick up any kind of score and win against George W. Bush. It was embarrassing beyond belief. Anyway, but I digress. So Graham Hancock says there was an advanced human civilization that lived in the remotest antiquity, beyond the last ice age, that this civilization had technology, skills in mapping, an understanding of astrology, urban planning, terraforming, the ability to build tremendous megalithic structures, and that we have lost our ability to understand anything about that time and place because modern archaeology has its timeline. Its timeline only goes back about 6,000 odd years. And before that is a big mystery where we were basically hunter-gatherers for a few 100,000 years, doing nothing of any interest or any value or any merit. Now, it makes no sense that you can just completely wipe out any sort of evidence, and there's lots of evidence in various megalithic structures all over the earth, that would give credence to the theory that there must have been some kind of human civilization that pre-existed the modern agrarian human civilizations of Sumeria, of ancient Mesopotamia, of Egypt, and in Mesoamerica of the Incas, the Mayas, the Aztecs, and obviously before them. But it just seems to me like this is a very good explanation for so many things that we don't understand. Monuments in Indonesia, which I didn't even know existed until this documentary. And there's compelling evidence. If you just watch this, you think, that makes a lot of sense. These kind of hexagonal basalt blocks that were used to construct things. You think, well, why would anyone go to the trouble of hauling these things up a mountain and building this enormous complex that's almost like a step pyramid? Why would people have done this in Mexico? Why would people have done this in Egypt? Why is it so important for these monuments, which we cannot date because they're made of stone? And the only way we know how to date things is with carbon dating. Carbon dating is used on organic material. So you can find, something that was once alive, and you can date the amount of carbon-14, I think it is the isotope that remains in that sample over time, and you can figure out roughly within an area of about 100 to 500 years how old something is. And it's not the best, but it's probably one of the most accurate ways that we can identify the age of a sample. Of course, that doesn't help you with stone, because stone is not alive, and you can't date something that doesn't have carbon in it with carbon-14 dating. So all of this is just fascinating, and Graham Hancock has never given up, despite being mocked and ridiculed and denigrated by modern archaeologists who've just said this guy is a crackpot, he's a nutcase, he's not to be taken seriously, and done everything they could to devalue his work and to destroy his reputation. So I love this show. It's amazing.
He's a modern day Da Vinci, actually, if you think about it. In a way, not exactly, but I mean, Da Vinci was also ridiculed, head up for heresy, if I think at one stage. No,
I think maybe that's certainly true for Galileo, who was, he had the cheek to say that the sun is at the center of our solar system and not the earth, and that the Catholic Church went, oh, burn him at the stake. And luckily they didn't burn him, because he recanted. He said, oh, no, I was obviously wrong. The church is right. Just please don't burn me, which is what any sensible person would do. But it is very, very interesting work. And I don't think we've even scratched the surface of what there is in our remotest antiquity.
So on this show, Gareth, so Graham is basically explaining or trying to actually figure out how exactly these ancient civilizations were living, and how these ancient buildings were built, is basically what I'm picking up.
Yeah, he's trying to explain. I mean, for example, Mash, there are certain like blocks of solid rock that weigh up to 12, 15 tons that could not be moved. You would have trouble moving them even today with a crane. And certainly at those heights and at those distances, some of these, stones were mined hundreds of kilometers from where they eventually were put into these monuments. And nobody can explain how they did it. And people are more than satisfied in modern archaeology to go, yeah, it's just a tomb. Yeah, they just built this to bury some king, which is insane. I mean, there's just no reason. There's never been a body found. There's no explanation for how that could possibly be true. It was just like the most simple explanation that ancient Egyptologists, not even ancient, just Egyptologists from about the 1920s could come up with. And remember, we're discovering new things about human history every single day.
So we're not. So are we gonna ignore that History Channel show about ancient civilizations and how they used to actually collaborate with aliens in building these?
Yeah.
We're gonna.
Corona's Boring says polygonal masonry, which is a kind of building technique, is fascinating, and the term you're deliberately avoiding is pre-diluvian. No, I think you there's no such thing as pre. You mean antediluvian, ANTE. That's the term that you're looking for. Corona's Boring. Each of these cultures have a flood legend. Now that's true. So antediluvian means before the flood, and all of the cultures in the world, going back as far as we can tell, every single culture on earth, from the ancient Peruvians to the ancient Chinese to the Turkish to the Greeks to the Romans to the Egyptians, every one of them has this story, and it's part of what eventually ended up in the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim holy books. There was a flood. God was angry, decided to wipe the slate clean, start again, but there were a few survivors, and that those survivors were the people who had been part of this advanced civilization, who then taught civilization to those primitive creatures that were our ancestors. So it's scary because it means that there isn't this straight line of history. That history is this continuous straight line of improvement. It really isn't. And you can even in recent history see that that's not true. If you look back at the kind of development and growth and building and architecture and engineering that the ancient Greeks and Romans were up to about 2,000 years ago, and then you look at how everything descended into chaos in Europe during the Dark Ages, where nothing bigger than a small church was built until at least 1100 AD, and then they start building much more impressive things again. So for some unbelievable, inexplicable reason, there's this huge gap somewhere between about AD 300 and 1100, where humans in Europe just were very backward again, where of course there were ideas, there was a lot of religious stuff going on, but there weren't any of the great achievements of classical Greek and Roman history. And you could see that is possible on a much longer span of time. So this is fascinating stuff. It really is amazing. It is similar to what Charles Berlitz did in the Bermuda Triangle, says Silicide. I'm not familiar with that, but maybe you can fill us in. Yes. While the rocks do date the fossils date the rocks more accurately. That's true if you can find fossils around them. And so many of these places are devoid of human remains. In other words, there are no human. There's no reason why, because if they were settlements, they should have had people around them, right? People would have been buried there or whatever. I mean, this one in Turkey was deliberately covered up. People went and took enormous trouble to bury it and to hide it away so that one day it would be discovered perfectly in the state that it's in now. You've got to ask yourself why the hell that would happen. Sun Marie says, ancient apocalypse poses such an interesting theory. My hubby and I have been going down that rabbit hole for the past week. Yeah. They're looking, says Aiden, at sound frequencies as the answer to how they move those large stones. Yes,
the biggest question is always, where did these civilizations disappear to? There is no remains of any civilization. Their houses are gone. Their skeletal remains. There is nothing. Where did they all disappear to?
Well, George even says, George Meany, imagine losing computers and the internet today and then try to explain it or recreate it when most of the planet dies. You see, we always think that there's going to be evidence that we existed. But if you imagine an enormous Earth event, an asteroid smashes into the Earth, like, the one that killed the dinosaurs, for example, that reduced so much of the planet to rubble and ash and fire that whatever was alive, with the tiny exception of only a few places which managed to continued to exist. I mean, most of the species that were alive on planet Earth when that asteroid hit with the dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous era, that asteroid wiped out all evidence of, civilizations or animal species or any. We're only discovering them now because so many of them fell into mud, and that mud eventually became rock, and then we've cracked open a few of those rocks and discovered some of these dinosaurs. But human beings, look at all the stuff that we think we consider civilization. Like, if I just think about it, all these books, if there was an asteroid that plunged into Earth, these would all be incinerated. My house would be reduced to rubble. There would not be one brick piled upon another. All the photographs, all the recordings, all of the stuff, even the stuff in the cloud, would be wiped out because those servers would be wiped out. There would be nothing left to prove that I had existed here if something like that had to happen. Similarly, if we had an enormous, global scale flood, there would be places, sure, that were high enough that would be able to survive, but everything else would be destroyed. And that would include much of what we consider the most advanced parts of the planet. There are very few cities on Earth that are not on a major waterway, either a harbor or a river or something. And those would all be taken out in a situation of flooding like that. So you have to think, if this, on the scale of, 10 to 12,000 years, it's very easy to wipe out entire civilizations and all the evidence of them. So how would you, if you were forced to try and send a message to people in 10,000 years from now, what would you do just to kind of let them know that you'd existed?
There's nothing you can do. And Gareth, 10,000, 12,000 years is such a tiny sliver in the timeline of the Earth. It's literally like a second in the timeline of the Earth. So there's literally nothing you can do to send a message.
Right. Absolutely right. I mean, they say that human beings, if you took the life of the planet Earth, which is 4 billion years, and you took a clock, one of those old round-faced clocks, 12 o'clock at the top and 6 o'clock at the bottom, all of the time from 0000 right the way up to 23:59 and 40 seconds, no humans.
Yeah.
No humans. We're only there for the last 20 seconds of the entire clock's time, to give you an idea of how long Earth has been around before humans came and made any kind of move on it. So that's interesting.
Yes,
right,
we're a very young species.
Tiny, and we're so unimportant. This is what I said yesterday about climate change and global warming. The planet will be fine. The planet will continue to exist whether we're on it or not, and new species will come up and exist because life is very, very difficult to completely wipe out, as we've learned from prehistory. So it would be interesting to see how all of this changes over time, and what people might say about our civilization now in 100, 200, 300, let alone 1,000 years. If we're lucky enough to last for 10,000 years, which I don't know if we can, there's so much that can go wrong. If we last for 10,000 years, what will they say about the people who are alive in the year 2022?
That's a good question. We'd like to find out one day if
we were savages.
We
were these Neanderthal savages who just plundered, killed, and destroyed everything that has any worth.
Yeah.
They used to have an app called Twitter where they'll just talk crap and they just share their thoughts that nobody cared about.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody was listening to anyone else.
Everybody wanted to talk.
I still think it would be really amazing if they can discover even more compelling evidence that would make it impossible for people to just wipe out Graham Hancock's theories. If someone had to find something that was irrefutable, and I don't know what that might be, maybe some piece of ancient technology that we can't, and there are things that they've dug up, things that they can't explain properly, machines of a kind. And if we could find out a little bit more about that time, 10,000, 12,000 years ago, I think that then it would be very, very difficult for conventional archaeologists to say, don't worry about that, it's not a big deal.
But Gareth, it also goes back to our current civilization. 10,000 years from now, if our civilization no longer exists on this planet, and whatever species exists by then, whether it is human or not, they're also going to see maybe the remains of our buildings, the remains of the Empire State Building, and think to themselves,
you say that, Mash, if you've ever, there's been a really interesting documentary, I forget the name of it, but if New York City had to be, if all the humans in New York had to die, and you can even see this here in South Africa, if you look at a plot of land in a city or a town where there's a house and people move out of the house and eventually it's condemned, and you know, you get homeless people moving in, but the weeds start growing and the trees start growing and the grass starts, everything gets out of control. Within a couple of months, that property is overrun with plants, and it's very hard to see the original building. And then over an even longer period of time, like a few decades, the plants start destroying the buildings. They break open the concrete, they destroy the foundations, the roots grow through the building itself, and ultimately it's pulverized. If you go there in 100, 200 years, there's nothing left. You would not, you would struggle to figure out that there had been a house there. And over hundreds of years, 500, 600 years, you're not going to find very much evidence unless you are painstakingly going through, archaeological remains and finding little bits of pottery or whatever else it is, and saying, oh, well, look, there must have been humans living here once, but they must have been so primitive. Meanwhile, you had air conditioning and you had internet and you had UPSs and solar power. They wouldn't know because everything would be so disintegrated that within a couple of 100 years that you wouldn't be able to tell that there'd been a house that humans had lived in some kind of civilized way.
Yes. I mean, we'll also see documentaries in about 100 years, 200 years, talking about how they used to have devices, little devices that they used to communicate. And they used to communicate on them so often. Yeah, they didn't even talk to each other because they were just talking to each other through these devices. And they'll be like, wow, did they click when they communicated? Yeah. And the way we talk about ancient civilizations now is how they'll be talking about us.
I mean, how do we know that they didn't have something like this? There wouldn't be any way to make a phone last for thousands of years. There's no way you could do that.
My phone is 2 years. My phone's 2 years old and it's already slowing down and falling apart. Exactly. So that's a great way of actually, that's a great way of actually viewing it. It won't last.
So what do you think of the show, Ruth?
So I think it's amazing how he sort of just lifts the sort of, if you picture a head and he just lifts the top off to say these archaeologists they have to think bigger, and they won't acknowledge him for any of it. No. I think there's one guy. And the truth is that he's basically said that these structures have such a connection with the astrological heavens, and there's a reason, and there was definite calculation and there was definite purpose. And he talks about a lot of what they saw dragons were, which were meteors, comets, and just how that they were terrified, obviously, because obviously these things happened, that they would have these showers, these collisions, perhaps on Earth, maybe not to such a large scale as wiping out the dinosaurs, but they definitely impacted on, excuse the pun, on the Earth as they knew it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, listen, doesn't it strike you as weird that this flood myth is part of every civilization's mythology? That every civilization on Earth,
I think it's actually
has some
fantastic.
idea. Well, it shows you that we're all linked, right? And that that there's this memory. Remember, if you want to talk about something that humans need to remember for hundreds, if not thousands of years, you either put it into music, dance, poetry, or mythology. Those are the only things that you can do in order to preserve something. I mean, you can carve things on stone too, but as we've just discussed, sometimes that doesn't stay where it is. It gets buried under sand, gets lost, it gets washed away. But if people transmute stories through generations by song, by dance, we know that, on our continent in Africa, our history is told orally. It's told by the old people who will gather around, tell the young people the story of where they come from, tell the young people what their culture is all about, explain to them where their language and their music and their stories all come from. And that's the way that it has been carried down for at least hundreds of years and maybe a lot more. So if in our deepest recesses of memory, all civilizations have this flood thing going on, there must be something to it. There must be something about that we were like, oh my God, this is the closest we've ever come to becoming extinct. Because that would remain in the story, right? No one's going to take that out of the story. It's the main climax. It's like the movie Apocalypse, but you leave out the asteroid.
Yes, 100%. And sorry, Doug here says that Tupperware will survive.
There are some things that will survive forever, right? But they're even discovering now that there are bacteria that can destroy plastic.
Yes,
so again,
amazing.
This might not be an explanation for any kind of ancient civilization that did invent plastic. Who knows that we aren't the first things that have discovered plastic? I mean, plastic's just a carbon chain of a certain length, and these things can form naturally. That's how we discovered plastics. But who's to say that there wasn't stuff like that? And you telling me that plastic isn't going to wear down over 10,000 years? Show me a plastic that will survive that. There aren't stones that will last 10,000 years. Nonsense.
Gareth, I'm recording you and I'm sending you to the paper straw people. I'm sending this clip to the paper straw people to tell them that, listen up, enough is enough.
Right.
But
exactly.
So I think the answers will lie also on our DNA, on our mitochondrial DNA one day. They'll be able to figure out exactly, like they're doing it already now with all these genealogy tests. But I think there's much more to it that we'll be able to know in 200-300 years' time of exactly what goes on.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it is sort of a bit of a blueprint to our genetic history, is to look at our DNA. It's not even completely well understood now. There's a lot about our genetic code that is completely misunderstood. We're not sure what that supposed junk DNA is. I just want to throw in this comment because it came in from somebody earlier about another story that's in the news, which is worth talking about. Tracy says, Elizabeth Holmes, the Theranos fraudster, got 11 years in jail. That story is insane. So either of you know this story?
I know this story very well.
Okay, go ahead,
Elizabeth
Mash,
Holmes is a damn nutcase. I've been following this story for quite some time. I even listened to the podcast about it.
Yes.
I've got the name of the podcast. It's Holmes something. But so Elizabeth Holmes dropped out of, I think, was she in Stanford, where she was studying? I can't remember exactly where she was studying. I don't have the details in front of me. But she started a company that claimed to be able to run a whole slew of tests, blood tests, with just a finger prick. So just one drop of blood was all it took to run a whole slew of tests, from HIV tests and a whole range of other tests. And people bought into this. People actually believed in her vision. And she managed to convince many millionaires and multi-billionaires to invest in this. And
she raised something like $700 million from venture capitalists and private investors. And by the way, she started this when she was what, 19 years old?
When she was about 19 years old. And the whole time, some of her professors there at Stanford, just after she dropped out, were like, "This is not possible. What do you mean? This is not possible?" But she kept pushing. And the more she pushed, the more people were like, wow, it's a story of strength and inspiration because she was able to do it. And I was like, no, she wasn't. She's just lying to everyone about something that doesn't exist, a product that never existed and never will exist. And the more she lied, the more people bought into it. She raised millions and millions. In fact, I think she reached $1 billion at some point, if I'm not mistaken.
She personally was worth like $4.5 billion at her height. And
she's
worth virtually nothing. In fact, she's going to jail, obviously. 4 counts. She's been found guilty of 4 counts of fraud and conspiracy. In January of 2022, the case started, and it lasted until just the other day. And now she's going for 11 years, 3 months to prison. Yeah, you've explained that perfectly, Mash. What a nutcase. But it shows you again how human beings are so desperate for easy answers to complicated questions.
Yes.
We would rather
Nobody
take this simple explanation, even if it's inaccurate, than actually go to the trouble of trying to figure it out ourselves.
Nobody ever took the initiative. Oh, the podcast I listened to is called The Dropout. It explains it very well. It also comes with accounts of some of the people who actually used the Theranos machine and actually got blood tests done through it. One woman thought she was HIV positive for like 2 weeks because of this damn machine. And it was giving people negative results. People are thinking they have illnesses and diseases they never had. And another thing, it was called I forgot the name of the actual unit. Do you remember the name of the unit, Gareth?
No, but you called it the Theranos machine, and that's good enough for me. I don't know much more than what you've already said.
The Edison.
Okay. Well, listen, this is just proof again that human beings will fall for a whole lot of shit if it sounds too good to be true. I mean, Ruth, if someone came to you, Mash, if someone came to either of you and said, hey, listen, all I need is one drop of blood and I'll just identify everything that could possibly go wrong with you. It'll tell you whether or not you're going to get cancer. It'll tell you whether or not you have to be careful of high blood pressure. We'll tell you all about just the one drop of blood and we'll figure everything out because we've got this incredible machine. And, the more complicated these things look, the more people go, well, it must be true. It's like human beings. If they take a pill, they start believing they're getting better, even if it's just, what do they call it? God, I always forget this word. What's the word for something?
Placebo. Placebo.
Thank you very much. A placebo. You give people a placebo. They don't know that it doesn't work, but they start believing it, and guess what? They get better. Human beings are so convinced by nonsense, and we're so easily persuaded by kind of rubbish arguments a lot of the time that nobody asks hard questions of these things. This woman
100%.
could quite easily have still been running this business. She could have been doing thousands of tests in inverted commas, every day and charging people a fortune for them and then giving them these health. I mean, I've got a report here in the drawer that they did on my DNA about 8 years ago, right? And it was this long and complicated process where they took some DNA on a cotton swab from the inside of my mouth. And then they gave me a whole breakdown of what that means. Now, a lot of it may be absolutely fantastic. It might be absolutely accurate. It might give a very good idea of what I can deduce and find out about my own physical well-being. But some of it is probably complete bullshit. And who's to say what part is what? And they did it for me for free. But can you imagine if Elizabeth Holmes had charged people $1,000 for each of these tests and had made an absolute killing, which she was doing at the time, mostly out of investors and venture capitalists. And frankly, if you're an investor or venture capitalist and you get taken because you haven't done the research, too bad. You kind of deserve that as well. Yeah, too bad. So I feel sorry for them, but not that much, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
And human beings are like, oh no, well, this sounds too good to be true, therefore it must be true.
That's what I always say. If it sounds too good to be true, it is.
Mash, I'm so glad you've learned that lesson, young my boy. So good. I'm still learning it.
Oh, Ruth, I'm just about to scream.
People want to be led. I mean, just with the whole lockdown. I mean, example, it was yesterday, the lockdown. We all well, not all, thank you. I'm an exception.
Yes.
But people want to be led, literally. Like some strange fetish where they dress up with bridles and reins and be led around the paddock. Go figure. We figured that out.
I mean, we talk about what civilizations will say about us in the future, but I guarantee you one thing they'll do is look back at this 2020 to 22, and they'll go, what the fuck is wrong with those people? Those must have been some of the dumbest people that ever walked the earth. I'm surprised they weren't on all fours. They all put on masks because the government told them to. They all started distancing themselves from each other. They shut down the shops. Were they fucking insane? I promise
they closed the pools.
They stopped selling alcohol. In South Africa, they told them not to wear open shoes or buy Woolworths chickens. People will look back and go, those must have been the most stupid people since primitive man to have made any rules for themselves. So
Dum-dums.
I'm with you, Ruth. Not all of us did that,
Yeah.
but a lot of people did, and they fell for it. I mean, you see these people still. They I saw 2 people over the weekend who were wearing masks, and I thought, look, maybe they're real germ phobes, okay, and that's entirely possible. There were always people before COVID who wore masks as well, but they were rare, and I didn't really take them too seriously or worry about them too much. So they might be those kind of people. But if they're people who are still afraid of COVID, I mean, there's still people, believe it or not, who are talking about COVID like it's important.
Okay, they have nothing more interesting going on.
But there's interesting stuff in the news. I think
Yeah.
you mentioned.
What do you got?
So yeah, Janis Vallis, the man who.
Okay, do you want to talk about him? You want to talk about Janis Vallis?
No, well, we had I think well done for actually considering that he should get parole. I know I'm controversial in saying so, but I think he was part of a military directive. At the end of the day, we were in a war, and look, killing is awful, but at the end of the day, the man's literally on his last legs. Why not let him go?
Let's give everybody the context here, because not a lot of people still care about
sure.
Janis Vallis.
Sure.
Janis Vallis is the guy who pulled the trigger on Chris Hani. Chris Hani was, of course, a very important member of the South African Communist Party. Many touted him to be a future leader of the ANC, a potential, president, if not cabinet minister, but someone who was very, very important during that transition period in this country's history. He obviously is a murderer. He spent, what is it now? How many years in jail?
Since what, 20 years?
Must be close to 20 years.
20
either way.
years.
They've basically said at various levels, we have parole boards. He should never be released on parole. He's done 20 years, which is more than most people in South Africa ever do for any crime. All of the crimes have like a maximum sentence of like 20 years, unless you've murdered 500 people, in which case they add more and more years to your sentence, right? And obviously, Chris Hani, we can't bring him back. And Janis Vallis has demonstrated time and time again that he has learned his lesson. I mean, I've said it before on this show that South African jail is probably one of the worst places you could end up in. It's no fun at all. And I'm not a fan of Janis Vallis. I don't believe that any, right-wing lunatic actor who picks up a gun and goes and takes out someone who they disagree with or who they think is a threat. That's not the kind of thing that we should ever defend in South Africa. But the Justice Minister says it's time. A South African Communist Party leader, Chris Hani's killer, Janis Vallis, should be released on parole. Apparently, the Constitutional Court has actually been the one to make the decision. Apparently, the Constitutional Court is now going to, in their unanimous judgment, which was penned by the Chief Justice, agree, finding that the minister's decision, that's Ronald Lamola, was irrational, and order the minister to place Vallis on parole. So that means he's going to be put on parole. That doesn't mean he's going to be a free man. It means that he'll be allowed out. He'll be, under house arrest. He's going to have who even knows what this guy looks like? The last picture we have of him is back in 1997 when he was at a hearing in the Pretoria City Hall, shortly before he was sentenced. That's the last time we've seen this guy. I don't know if there's anybody who's had an interview with him or whether he's spoken to anybody at all. But this is pretty much all we know about Janis Vallis. He was born in Poland, and he was an immigrant to South Africa, as far as I can recall. And he worked with, what was her name? Darby Lewis, Clive Darby Lewis and his wife, to plot the assassination of Chris Hani. But, do you think that someone should be released on parole, no matter what they did, no matter how horrible, no matter how symbolic their egregious crimes might be? Do you think they should be let out eventually?
Oh, it's a hard call, huh?
No,
It's such
that's
a
a hard call. It depends on
Such
the
a hard
crime.
call. Look,
Yeah,
I still think
apparently
pedophiles should be.
Yes.
No,
Go on.
read the comments. It's fine.
No. So Chris Hani's widow, who's Limpo Hani, she has lashed out at the Judge Zondo, over this. She basically said that he's failed the country, and he's obviously trying to. The judge is trying to explain this in legal terms, but she said she struggled to contain her emotions. Chief Justice Zondo has failed this country completely, and I'm not going to apologize. She feels the trauma she and her family were put through is not given due consideration by the Constitutional Court. The country is finished. Where in this country a foreign white can come into South Africa and kill my husband? She said she was shocked by Monday's judgment. It is diabolical, totally diabolical. I've never seen anything like this. And she then said, we are in shit. So, look,
Sure.
I think this is Limpo Hani's story. She can't, obviously, this is what makes her important and noteworthy, and nobody's asking her about other things that are going on in her life. She's been bearing this terrible this is her identity in some ways for what, 20 odd years, 22 years, 27 years. So I really think that this isn't emotional. You can't get emotional. If we live in a society that regards sentences as ending, then we need to release people once those sentences end. If we don't believe in that, then keep it going. Let's turn our attention to Jaco Voigt, who's coming in this morning to do his show. He is the CEO of Catalytic. Welcome, Jaco. You've met Ruth and Mash before. How are you?
Good morning, well, and everybody.
Lucky to see you. Yeah, good. Have you been watching Ancient Apocalypse?
I've not. I've been listening to you guys this morning, and it's sounded like you're quite philosophical about what we're doing here and where we're going. So it was interesting.
I mean, isn't it interesting? Don't you think that there's possibly another explanation for what happened in human prehistory?
Well, I was actually saying to my wife yesterday, I read somebody posted on Twitter, what if mycelium was basically feeding humans so that they can feed on us later when we die. So it was interesting. So Who knows what we're doing here?
Maybe we're just fuel for the mushrooms.
Maybe we're just here for the mushrooms. I know there's some people that I'm sure that is just here for the mushrooms.
Absolutely.
Wow. So Jaco, didn't you just go and do some race somewhere? You were just did you go to Muscle Bay? What was that thing?
Yeah, there's a place in it's between Oudtshoorn and Prince Albert. We went for 4 days to go and run 80 kilometers in a mountain there.
That is properly insane. I went to my doctor yesterday. He does these half Ironmans, and he did a full Ironman a couple of years ago. And you and your wife do these crazy 80-kilometer things. Now, just explain exactly what it is, because you just talk about it like it's not a big deal. But if I had to do 2 kilometers, I'd probably die.
No, look, what we're doing is it's still baby stuff. There's guys that run 160 kilometers. So we're doing baby stuff. We did.
Yeah.
Oops.
Oh, is that us? Let me just check if I remove Jaco here and I put him back on.
I always look at these people and wonder who's chasing them. Like, do they have imaginary? Like, why? Why do you torture yourself?
Who are you running from?
All right, while we're trying to get Jaco back on, because we've still got a few minutes to talk to him. Other stories in the news this morning. The last time Jacob Zuma went to jail, Twitter was moderated. This time, not so much. There are a lot of stories at the moment that are coming out about Twitter and how it's changed under Elon Musk. And, Donald Trump is back on, and this has got people crazy. But in mid-2021, Jacob Zuma went to jail, and deadly riots spread through KZN and Gauteng. On Monday, the Supreme Court of Appeal ruled that Zuma should return to jail, though possibly only after he appeals to the Constitutional Court. And obviously, things have changed now. The government has recognized it, and it started to fix intelligence and policing failures that allowed violence and destruction to spread during those riots. Political power has shifted, such as the door opening on President Cyril Ramaphosa stepping aside if he's charged with a crime. and Elon Musk has gutted Twitter. So people are nervous. What does this mean? I don't think it means very much at all, but that's just me. We'll have to see what happens. Hey, Jaco, sorry, we lost you. I think it was our fault.
No, it was my fault. Sorry, this load shedding. You know what they say, the mechanic's car is always in the shop. So my internet gave way, you know.
All right, well, let's talk about the internet, because this is what you and your company do. It's part of the reason that you have your own podcast where you talk about all kinds of interesting stuff to do with cybersecurity. And you've had some amazing guests this year. What is the largest, in your opinion, cybersecurity threat in the world right now? Where do you think that threat's coming from?
Well, last week when you and I were chatting about how everybody is saying they're so tired after the year and everybody is just in holiday mode now, I think the biggest threat for everyday businesses at this very point in time is holiday. You know, it's holidays coming up. You know, everybody is a lot more relaxed. I think people tend to go and leave, so there's less people in the office, and that makes us less vigilant. And then obviously, if you're going away on holiday and you're closing up shop, that IT systems, it still sits there. It's also alive, and it sits there, and it's possibly at your office. And who's looking at it? You know, so I think holiday at this point, at this time of the year, is probably the biggest security risk that there can be.
So you've got to be extra vigilant now. Which country in the world has the best cybersecurity?
If I had to take a guess off the cuff, I'd probably say Israel. You know, the technology that they churn out is really, really amazing. I mean, they obviously collaborate a lot with the US, but I mean, Israel is from a technology and from a security perspective I think it's top notch. I think in South Africa, you know, we tend to be, I think we're getting there, but we're not always as vigilant and aware of what can go wrong as other people in the world. But yeah, I think we're getting there. You know, it's a continuous getting the message out there and getting people to understand, because the problem with it is when similar, you know, we always talk about this, similar to your house. Whenever you want to or have to invest in security, you know, it's going to cost money, you know. So what's the value of a security investment or upgrading your security? Well, the value is until something goes wrong, then you wasted money. When something goes wrong, then the money was well spent, you know. So it's always difficult for to quantify that until something happens.
Jaco,
go ahead,
Yes.
Mash.
All right. Jaco, one of the biggest actually fears when it comes to cybersecurity for most companies is the PR of it, you know, especially when there's a hack. The PR of it is the most terrifying thing, because your customers or your clients knowing that their personal information could possibly be in someone else's hands from your servers is one of the most terrifying things for any business owner. And I wanted to find out, is it compulsory for businesses to actually communicate with their client base and tell them that, listen, guys, we've been hacked? Or can businesses just keep quiet and just shush about it? Is it a must for them to actually communicate that? And I'll also explain why I'm asking that, but please just answer first.
Wow, that's not an easy question. I think, Amash, if you look at with Poppy that's in play now, I think when an incident happens, you know, you've got to go at least to the relevant authorities in your industry and go and report it. I think you have to try and get ahead of something when it happens, and then let's be honest. You know, you've got customers, employees, suppliers. How can you keep something like that a secret? So I think I don't think there's necessarily a law or a regulation that compels an organization to go to the public and say, listen, this happened. But I think just being wise about it, because you can't hide it. You know, somewhere somebody's going to know about it. And then if you didn't say anything, then you know, how can you talk your way out of that thing?
Yes, and I was asking because my hosting provider actually, I think they got hacked, and I'm saying this because I've been getting emails from a whole different domain with like Russian RU, what's it called, subdomains and so forth, And
Yeah.
I actually asked them, I was like, are you guys hacked? Because I'm getting emails from foreign email addresses with my customer number and my details there. And it's saying, listen, click this link to renew this or renew that, renew this email or that domain and so forth and so on. And I'm like, hey, Bo, something's wrong. And I've been getting these for like the past 2 weeks. And I contacted them. They're like, no, don't worry.
Oh,
I'm
they
like,
wanted
they got my
wanted-
information somehow. Yeah.
Really? Huh. So they won't admit that they've been hacked.
Yeah. So
They won't.
yeah. So Mash, I think that's it's actually so in a podcast that I had last week where we spoke about email and stuff like that. So you can be a email or an internet service provider, and there's people can try and hack you or fish or whatever. But it's not to say that it came from that service provider. It can be that details were obtained elsewhere. But in saying that, I think when you blatantly go and ask a service provider, listen, were you hacked because of this and this and this? I think people will out of the nature of our industry, people will be apprehensive and maybe try and talk around it if you talk about it. I have this talk often or discussion often now. For me specifically, post this pandemic, customers tend to be perpetually dissatisfied and almost a little bit distrustful of any service providers. So post pandemic, all of us are having a hard time. Customers just want more, and they tend to be more unreasonable. So it's not an easy job as it used to be.
You've earned the right, Jaco.
I interviewed a guy yesterday who was the former COO of Lego, and he was fascinating to talk to. And one of the things he said is that the customer is not always right. And it takes a brave person in business to be able to accept that their customer might be wrong. And sometimes you have to educate people, and especially when they're not expert in a certain area, they're asking questions, they just don't know what the answers should be. And this is really why we like to get Jaco on, because there's so many things around this that we don't consider on a day-to-day basis. So Jaco, it's December, it's the holidays. There are lots of things that are not on people's mind. Your IT in your office, your cybersecurity, all of that stuff. People are also betting on the World Cup at the moment. Sports betting has gone through the roof in the last couple of days. So are there things that you could tell us we should do? Like if you leave your house, should you switch off your router? Should you disable all of that stuff?
Well, so Gareth, that's interesting. I think we know we're going into this increased form of load shedding, and electronics as a by nature doesn't like on and off all of the time. So I think switching it off, is neither here nor there. I think what's important is if you have a small business, and coming back to data is the new gold, if you want to call it that, or maybe the old gold now already. Is how secure is that server sitting in your office? Who's looking at it, etc., etc. When you were talking about earlier about if our civilization had to disappear, there'd be no evidence of the cloud and all that type of stuff. I wanted to say, our data center that we operate is bomb-proof, so I'm pretty sure that's probably the place where remnants of our civilization will be found. So for me, it's where do you store it? How how secure it is, and is somebody looking at it? So I think one of the key things that we always try and do is try and monitor services. If you can monitor stuff, then you can manage it. If nobody's looking at it, then it's a problem.
Well, that's unfortunately all we've got time for, but you can hear Jaco doing his own show a little bit later today, and always the most interesting people from all over the world who are at the top of their game in cybersecurity, as is Jaco Voigt. It's always good to see you, dude, and thank you very much for being on the show this morning.
Thank you very much. I'll see you later.
Cool. Awesome. We've got lots still to get to, and Ruth will stick around. She's with us until Blind History, which is 7:30. Don't go anywhere. That's all on the way. CliffCentral.com. It is Tuesday, and we're getting very, very close to the end of November. Tick tock. Just because it's about technology, connecting your business to the rest of the world doesn't mean you need to send rockets to space and use complicated solutions. Want to simplicate things? Well, join Jaco Voigt, who is the CEO of Catalytic, on the Unbundled podcast. With skin in the game and a keen focus on educating and assisting you and your business, Jaco decodes all the aspects of connectivity, security, and cloud solutions. Unbundled is brought to you by Catalytic and is available on cliffcentral.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This week on the Auto Trader podcast.
Moving on. So I don't know if you saw, but in December, petrol price is probably is going up again, specifically petrol.
It always goes up in December, right?
Diesel's going down though. So there's good news for everyone who has a diesel engine, but for petrol, it's going up. But I decided to do a little bit of digging to see what is the most expensive petrol in the world in terms of cost per liter. And of course, there are a few countries here where the cost of living is higher, people's salaries are higher, etc., which is fair. But there are a few nations here where it's like, whoa, people can't even afford this. So I wanted to, top 5. What do you think is the most expensive? Where is the most expensive petrol?
Catch us every Monday at 9 a.m. on YouTube and on autotrader.co.za.
That's right. And George will be with us on this show on Friday. We've also got a brand new episode of Blind History coming to you in the next half an hour, so stick around for that too. This morning we have Mash in the studio in Johannesburg, and we have Ruth in her house in Pretoria. Tell us a bit about you, Ruth. We don't know that much about you.
Okay, so
where are you, what do you do, all that kind of stuff.
Don't bore you with what I do on a day-to-day basis, but I decided in lockdown, shucks, I can't die of this plague and only have that I've ever just had a remedial job. So I decided to start my own little YouTube channel, and just sort of express my ideas, my opinions, try and get people to start thinking out of the box. What used to ick me really was that people still took their kids to circuses. Well, I don't know if that's the correct plural for circus, circus. Anyway, and circus, they just don't. People, they really follow the herd. And I was saying, have you ever had a thought of what happens behind the scenes? Do you ever think why that animal is doing what that trainer or that person waving a stick in front of them is doing? And that sort of really gave me the oomph. There's a terrible thing, and excuse for all the people who love animals in the comments and are listening, but there's something that happens from March to September in a little town called Taiji. I don't know if you've heard about
it. Is this where they kill all the whales?
The dolphins. The dolphins.
Yeah.
They go out and hunt, capture them, and literally destroy pods and families. And it's horrific. And it's because the Japanese, look, every culture has their pros and cons, but they believe that dolphins are a scourge on the oceans. And yeah, to me, that just didn't resonate. And I did a couple of shows on that. There was an incredible also documentary on Netflix.
So would you say you're a bit of an activist?
A little bit, but I just want people to use their brains. Just use your heads. When we have these like there are so many people, especially in Joburg, with their little plot of land. People will build their homes right up into the FSR of their boundary wall and have like a little patch of grass. And then what do? They go and buy a husky. Because my huskies are so cute and nice, they are just like such, and they're big and they scare the criminals away. But no, and they never take the dog for a walk, and then the dog finally manages to escape, and then, shame, my woofles is now gone. And you don't, people just don't think, and when it's exceedingly hot, like some temperatures that happen, there's no water. There's not enough water, and it just makes my blood boil. So and also people.
We kind of know you from your comments on the show. I mean, you're here every morning basically, and there are a small group of people, and I've suggested to the producers that we try and get as many of you guys to kind of be a part of the show as possible, so we can actually see who you are as well. Some people don't want to; they prefer to just be kind of anonymous, use a pseudonym or whatever. But what is it? That comment section can get pretty hectic. And Rebellious Ruth is one of the people who comments all the time, and you guys get into arguments. There's some people who really don't like each other. There's some people who do. It's like it's like a family, right? There's the drunk uncles, and there's the badly behaved teenagers, and all of that stuff. Tell me what's going on in the comment section. Give me the real story, because I think you know more than I do.
Ooh. So often we have a couple of trolls that come on. I mean, we love. I'm so glad that George is here. He's like become active. It's awesome. Welcome to the club,
George Meany. Right?
He's like part of the plebs now, part of the peasants. And I think the comedy, the camaraderie is awesome. Not so really, like if people start picking on me in particular, I don't have time to waste, like with your small fry ideas. I couldn't give a hash what you think of me. As long as I'm allowed to say my say, well, you're allowed to say your say. If we disagree, then we have to be adults about it. So yeah, those are some of my views. And yeah, if you like what I have to say, please.
You said you have a boring job, but I mean, there are boring jobs and there are boring jobs. So how boring are we talking here?
Okay, so I might get into a bit of shit for this, but I work for a gay, deaf Jewish man.
A gay?
Wait, what?
Deaf?
Oh, yes. My life is never boring.
Jeez, well, he won in life.
Boring. Yeah.
Sure.
My life is never boring, but yeah, I'm PA to a but he. It's interesting. It's interesting. Although I like to delve.
When you think of boring jobs, I wouldn't have put that one in there. I always think the most boring job must be like a Mash. What would be your worst job? I'd hate to work in a
call center. Call center.
Yeah, call center. I was just about to say, where you've got a whole bunch of people in this huge warehouse-sized office, and everybody's wearing headsets, and they're all talking to these angry customers who don't want to hear from them. Like an insurance call center would be my worst nightmare.
Yes, that would be the worst of the worst.
Or a security guard with like just a baton, like one security guard patrolling like I don't know, some burnt out building.
Ruth, do you also know sign language?
No, he doesn't sign.
Oh,
no.
How do you guys communicate?
I shout a lot. I used to have a little voice. In fact, when I was at school, we did a cabaret, and my English teacher thought I had a bit of talent, and that's sort of what happened there. But it gave me, at least I can say he's given me a voice, because now I shout a lot.
Look at a couple of people. talking about you here. First of all, there's Ruth is definitely a lover, not a fighter, says Tracy. Annette says, remember that Andre dickhead? Who's Andre? I don't know who you're talking about.
Who is that?
Someone wants to know, what is your podcast called, Ruth? Sam?
So it's on YouTube and it's Rebellious Ruth.
Okay.
So.
Ruth was the first one who made me feel at home in the comments section, says Mel. It's Melissa Peterson. Okay, that's nice.
You see. Ruth, who's
nice.
your top 5 in the comment section?
Yes.
Oh, now I'm gonna. So obviously, Corona's boring, and Carlos. By the way, I think I mentioned the joke about the Carlos. That's why I need to speak to George. But yeah, so it's I can't say top 5. Corona's boring. Tracy, Carlos. Who else is there? I'm just gonna scroll. Marco's excellent dude. The guys are just so Annette's excellent, like lovely. Melissa, Derek Barker. So enjoy Patrick. Yeah, a lot of the guys that are here today. Stevie, also incredible. Also propaganda and I like, we connect.
You know them better than I do.
Yeah, it's kind of, we're missing Sinele. Sinele hasn't been around. I sent him a pizza coning. So there. It's always lovely to see more ladies on the chats. Always awesome to see that. Niku.
Right. Well, listen. I like this because we get to have you on the show and we get to meet you, and we must do this with more of the people on the comment section. It's always good. Ruth is always 100%. A pleasant person in the comments, says Yonda. All right, you're like the mayor. They're calling you the mayor. Terrence says you're the mayor of the comment section.
Sure.
Is that true?
Sure. Well, subscribe to my channel, yo. No, I do these crazy. I think I have like multiple personalities that come out on my channel as well. So I'll have like a serious discussion topic, and then to liven it up, I do like I have Charlene from Boxburg. Her IQ is like 65.
Okay. Is that the one you were talking about with the Huskies earlier?
Yes, that the one. Yeah, she is like that, And yeah, we do Charlene. Charlene came to me. A lot of collaboration with lots of people. And then we also, I do a sort of an esoteric, holistic, astrological, and I know you're not into the whole elements, astrological thing, but it's full moon time and La Luna comes down, and then La Luna gives readings and a little bit of fortune telling and a lot of mumbo jumbo, but it's lots of fun.
Well, one thing I've got to thank you for is the reminders to like and subscribe, because I always forget to do that, and then people get into trouble and I get shat on in meetings. So please, I'm going to remind everybody now, like and subscribe. And George says the comment section puts me under extreme morning pressure, but I'm loving it. Makes the day better with Ruth and company. Well, that's nice. See, awesome. I think for a lot of people, it's kind of, the original and proper definition of a community is that people get together and they share ideas and they laugh and they have some fun. And it's the way that you have a routine in your day that kind of starts you off properly. I think for a lot of people, that's what it is.
No,
all right. Well, Mash, we got a couple of things we have to get to before we go all the way into blind history. Anything else on your agenda for this morning?
Hey, Gareth, let's get into scams, because we've been discussing scams the whole morning.
Oh no!
So
I thought we finished this with Jaco. He'd already made us all fearful of what's going on our servers when we're not paying attention. What scams have you encountered lately?
So I went down the scam rabbit hole and I started actually doing some research on some of the most notorious scams throughout history, which basically set the precedent and set the bar for scams today. So we're going to start off with the Ponzi scheme. I mean, everybody knows the Ponzi scheme, but many people don't know where it originated. And it originated...
and did it start with them?
No, unfortunately, it did not. It didn't start with them. I have lots of friends who sell Herbalife, so I really can't say anything too bad about them as much as I want to.
The ancient Egyptian pyramid was the original pyramid scheme. Someone said to them, hey, guys, if we all pitch in and build this pyramid, then we'll have something really cool in 10,000 years to show off to humanity. And, of course, they all did, and now there's nothing. We think it's a tomb. So that was probably the original scheme. But Bernie Madoff Bernie Madoff is the most famous Ponzi schemer of our time, right?
Yes, he is one of the most
Mm.
famous. But the original, it was actually Charles Ponzi, who promised clients a 50% profit within 45 days or 100% profit within 90 days by buying discounted postal reply coupons in other countries and redeeming them at face value in the US as a form of arbitrage. In reality, Ponzi was paying earlier investors using the investments of later investors. And as you know, with any Ponzi scheme or pyramid scheme, it topples once too many people join, because now the early investors have been paid all y'all money and there's no money for you new people.
Right.
And then the second one has to be,
our bot in the comments says, send me 300 Rand and I'll tell you more about scams.
Send account.
All right, carry on.
The second one has to be the Miracle Car scam. It was an advanced fee scam that ran from 1997 to 2002 by James R. Nicholas and Robert Gomez. In its run of just over 4 years, over 4,000 people brought 7,000 cars that did not actually exist, causing over 21 million US dollars stolen from the victims. So people are just buying cars that just never existed, just based off of a promise, basically. The third one has to be the Sir Drake estate fraud. This, now we're going back into like the what you call, like the horse and buggy days. And this scam, which took place over 70 years before coming to an end in 1936, involved 28 swindlers who convinced people all across America that a wealthy individual named Jacob Baker of Philadelphia had died, leaving his estate behind with no heirs. Victims were prompted to pay litigation fees to release the funds, which they'll receive 100 to 1. Based off of the investment. First of all, 100 to 1, it doesn't even make sense at all.
No,
and people fell for this back then.
We were talking about things that are too good to be true. I mean, this is a perfect example. Like if someone's trying to sell you something and it just sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. Don't fall for that.
It absolutely is.
Oh.
And then I have two more here. The first one is the Republic of Boyais. And this scam is where hundreds of people departed England and Scotland on voyages to the promising new country of Boyais. The would-be settlers were shocked to find out that the place promoted by Gregor MacGregor, with that name, Gregor MacGregor, were in fact nothing but a desolate wilderness. So they were promised this heaven on earth, this Narnia type of place, and they all embarked.
Imagine being some like 15th century English or Scottish peasant, and you're like rummaging around in the mud trying to find something that's got a bit of protein to eat, and you haven't washed in like 8 years, and like life is just fucking terrible. And then suddenly someone comes along and says to you, I have a ticket here, so it'll take you to the promised land. It's going to be amazing. There's milk and honey, and there's plenty to eat, and it's beautiful, and it's sunny, and it's clean, and it's not full of horrible people who are going to tell you what to do. And you buy it with all of your life savings, and you end up in some barren wasteland. Ugh.
My entire 15 quid.
Yeah.
And then the last scam, this is actually the most exciting one. So Emmanuel, his name is New Day. Okay, Emmanuel New Day is known as the biggest scammer in the history of Nigeria after he sold a fake airport to a Brazilian man called Nelson Sagaguchi for the sum of $242 million. Together with 5 slightly loyal accomplices, New Day pulled off the impressive feat of impersonating the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria successfully enough to convince Nelson Sagaguchi, a director of the Brazilian bank, Banco Neruste. He then convinced Sagaguchi to invest in a new airport in the Nigerian capital of Abuja. He asked for a $10 million commission for negotiating the investment, while Sagaguchi happily dreamed of the airport he'd one day own a slice of. So happily, he forgot to ask to see the construction works or anything like that. Amazingly, New Day was caught after the Brazilian bank noticed that half of its capital was resting peacefully in the Cayman Islands. In total, Naruste lost $242 million from the scam, making it one of Nigeria's most heroic ever, and causing some serious questions to be asked about how quickly Sakaguchi was willing to cough up cash to anyone who came to him with a slick story about airplanes.
It's
And then
you have to have a Nigerian at the top of that, right? Like the Nigerians are the kings and queens of scamming.
I mean, in America, they know Africa as like a place where we just scam people because that's their usual interaction with Africans. It's always a Nigerian prince or some Nigerian kid who wants to buy a goat.
Sex god that can give you the immortality and pleasure zones to fulfill every woman or man's dream sexually or something crazy.
Can give me that number, Ruth.
Look at this. Arbot says some millionaire lost $100 in a scam about a building that needed to be built. Well, I mean, it's the same as this guy with the airport, right? Another famous scam in history is the Spanish prisoner scam. Today we call it the Nigerian prince scam. That's true. And according to Super Jacob Zuma, 1820 English settlers were scammed into thinking South Africa was the promised land. And then, of course, they landed in the Eastern Cape and they were like, oh, my fuck. Is this what you guys have promised us? I mean, like, you promised us this, the Eastern Cape, right?
But there were some punishments for Nude, of course. So Nude only spent a few years in jail for the fraud, but a decade later found himself back inside on charges of murder and terrorism. It's so nice to see he's keeping himself busy.
Well, I mean, this is what George says, and he's right. It just shows that parting with money is more about trusting a person than the actual analysis of the deal. I wonder how many scams are as a result of people you know. Well, isn't it true that most people who've been ripped off have been ripped off by people they know, not complete strangers?
Word. True.
Yeah, so you got to be
scary.
super careful about that stuff.
In fact, more people, they say, sorry, Gareth.
No, go on.
No, they say that obviously when terrible things happen to you, it's from people you know. It's the people that you trust and allow into your inner circle that actually end up stabbing you in the back, which is so sad.
No, for sure.
So sad.
Now, before we go to blind history, you mentioned that you watched Kevin Fraser over the weekend, obviously on the internet, right? Or did you see him in person?
No, live. We went to a live show.
So Kevin Fraser, for those people who don't know, very, very talented South African, what would you call him? Comedian. I mean, he's a comedian, obviously. He's got all these characters, though. He does these accents and he's superb. He really is very, very talented. I bumped into him, 2 weeks ago, after a dinner that I was at. And we didn't talk for long, but what a guy, huh? Really, really smart and very funny.
Yes, very smart, very funny, down to earth. And he just says it like he is. I mean, says like everything just happens, you know. One of the things that I'm going to just highlight that he mentioned now with all the load shedding, where some people forget that they've left an appliance on, or they've, you know, I'm sure for some woman, like my hair looks so frazzled this morning because I didn't exactly have a hairdryer to like continue the process, but we'll deal with it. So excuse the mad hair this morning. And he says, like, you'll be sleeping and all of a sudden the lights come back on, and literally the lights come back on and the hairdryer's going and the computer's loading up again and it's the Netflix logo. And he's just so witty and he's so on the ball, and he just brings it home. He just makes you feel human and laugh, and what a fantastic guy. So yeah, highly recommended. You're on mute.
All right. We cannot hear Gareth at the moment.
Yeah. Gareth.
Sorry, there we go. Is that better? Sorry, guys.
Yes.
I was just saying that Kevin Fraser, obviously he gets what it is to be funny, but in South Africa, I mean, that's a special gift, you know, to be able to like read what makes South Africans laugh. Corona's Boring says you should do a blind history on William Turner, aka Devil Bill, aka Dr. Bill Livingston, the original snake oil salesman. Whew. Yeah, scammers. Not a bad idea.
Doesn't he have a movie about him? I think there's a movie about him.
It's the first I've heard of
I'll
the
have
guy.
to check.
All right. Quickly, apparently MASH is done with Apple. He is no longer going to be a sheep. He's no longer buying Apple products. You are finished with them. Are you sure, Mash? Because people have said this before, and then they go running back to Apple with their tail between their legs.
Gareth, I am absolutely sure. So yesterday I went to a phone launch event for Xiaomi, and they're launching some Android phones here in South Africa. And I use some of these phones. These phones are priced actually below my phone, for starters, below these iPhones that we're using. And the features, the camera, everything about it was just so impressive. And I thought to myself, first of all, half of these features we don't have. Literally half of the features on this thing we don't have. And we're going to get them in probably 2 years, 3 years time. And once we get them, we'll be like, wow, it's the best thing on earth. But it's like other people have had these for years. And I know that this is the argument that Android people usually come with, but I'm beginning to see it. I'm not saying that I'm going to buy one tomorrow. I'm just saying that Ryan is already commenting, don't lie. No, but seriously, I am not saying I'm going to buy one tomorrow, but I am saying that there is more out there. There is more out there. I've learned that everybody's just attacking me in the comment section actually about switching over. But I am convinced, Gareth, our phones are not all that. There is more out there. The comments, oh my goodness. Matthew says
Mash is being paid a shit ton of money for this ad by the Chinese. Steve says once you go Mac, you don't go back. A lot of people are saying you're making a terrible mistake. Ooh, you see how tribal people get around phones? Are you very uptight about what kind of phone you use, Ruth, or do you not give a shit?
No, I don't give a shit. It's like the car I drive. As long as it gets me from A to B, I don't care.
Okay. Well, I think people are very uptight about this. Rusty says, Ad-B says, Apple fanboys. Rusty says, I'm with you, Mash. Mash is right, says Congo Chris. Woo. Okay.
So now that you guys, everyone who thinks I'm right, I'm starting a Facebook group. It's my own little cult of people who side with me on this. You guys might have to pay a membership fee. But let's have some fun and explore. Let's explore and keep our minds open because we cannot be sheep forever. There is more out there.
Well, Archie Pandey says, I have a Xiaomi phone. I'll never go back to Samsung. Super Jacob Zuma says, no ways. I bought a Poco, which is a Xiaomi budget, for under 5K and its power. Kutle says, welcome to the Android family. Good on you, Mash. Don't listen to these troglodytes. Carl says, shut your mouth. Android is for the poor. All right. We're going to leave it at that. Ruth, thanks for being on the show this morning. It was good to meet you properly for the first time. And we'll talk to you soon. Also, go and check out Rebellious Ruth on YouTube. We will be back tomorrow with more live in between 6 and 8 o'clock. And lots of good things, lots of cool people. We've only got a few shows left until the end of the year. I mean, before you know it, right? What is today? Today's the 22nd. Yeah, so tomorrow, it's basically one more month of shows. And then we're done. We're finishing the day before Christmas Eve. So that's the whole bang shoot in one bag. We will see you tomorrow. But before we go, here's a little blind history for you. Brand new episode. Anthony Meter and I talk about two really amazing people from the medieval era who I think you will love. They were like the original power couple. And both of them were extraordinary people. Take a listen. Here's Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine. The fiery, furious relationship between the medieval era's most famous power couple led to glory and terrible failure. Their empire was the greatest in the West since the time of Charlemagne. He was 9 years younger than her, but she matched his energy. When they weren't making love and producing another of many children, they were plotting against each other or fighting like cat and dog. She took no prisoners, but he made her one for 15 years. The world, it seems, wasn't big enough for Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine. Blind History. We're approaching the end of the latest season, and we've had so many interesting emails from people and people requesting all kinds of things. And one thing that we thought we'd struggle with at the beginning of this is to find enough women of history. And Ant and I would sit there and we'd wring our hands and we'd call out to the sky and go, oh, if only we had more interesting people to talk about. But they actually, through the course of these seasons, you'll see have been plenty of powerful women. There is not one powerful woman who even comes close in the medieval era to this incredible woman, the redoubtable, the powerful, the mighty Eleanor of Aquitaine. And obviously we're featuring her and her husband, Henry II, in this episode. But actually, I think this came about, Ant, because you and I love the medieval period. We love the English royal family. We love the Plantagenets. But what we like especially about this is it's this love story intertwined into power and war and medieval Europe and so much other stuff that's going on.
Yeah, I absolutely love Henry and Eleanor. Queen Elizabeth, as you know very well, is on both sides, both marriages, there's connections.
Yeah.
So this lineage is very strong and powerful. And another thing that I really love about history is everything's interconnected in some way. If we look at Rolla, the mad Viking, that massive Viking, William the Conqueror was his great-grandson, and Henry II, his great-grandfather was William the Conqueror. So that lineage is insane. And this era was where these kings and queens, they need to go out on their horses and go and sort the enemy out themselves. It was a chivalry. There was romance. There was conniving. Everything that you can possibly think of happened in this period now.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, both Henry II and Eleanor were related also. They were even more closely related than Eleanor and her first husband, the King of France, who she divorced on grounds of them being too closely related. So it's full of intrigue. But let's just talk about this remarkable woman, first of all, because I don't think Henry would have been nearly the success that he was. And he was a force to be reckoned with throughout his life. But he wouldn't have been nearly the man that he turned out to be if he hadn't married this extraordinary woman. She was of Southern French origin. Her grandfather was William the Troubadour, the first king who used to compose songs and poems. He was this romantic figure, probably one of the most famous dukes of Aquitaine. And she inherited all of that, plus her own father's warrior spirit. And he raised her as a man, not that she was, confused about her gender identity, but he raised her in the arts of war, of hunting, of horse riding, of how nations needed to be run. She was a properly well-schooled, well-educated young woman.
Yeah, first in literature, philosophy, avid horse rider, and led a very active life. And she inherited her father's title and the extensive lands very young. I mean, she was around 15 years old upon his death. And also, she had a brother. He also died.
Yeah, he predeceased her. I think he died at like age 4, along with their mother.
Yeah, so then she was the sole heir. And then,
well, she was the most desirable woman in Europe, without a doubt. She was what these days they would call like a really good match for anybody. And here was this woman with these, you mentioned vast lands. I mean, when Eleanor inherited Aquitaine, Poitou, Gascony, all of these provinces from her father upon his death, she actually owned more of territorial France than the King of France. That's how powerful and that's how rich she was. So naturally, you have a young woman of that age running around France. She becomes a target for ransom, for kidnapping, and pretty much the first nobleman that can get to her and successfully wed her and have a child with her inherits this extremely large kingdom, which was a duchy at the time, and plenty of wealth with it.
And along came King Louis. I think he was Louis VI, but he became Louis VII upon his father's death. Mm-hmm. He first of all set up, when her dad died, sort of surrounded and protected her in inverted commas. And then in the end, the marriage happened. So she was then effectively Queen of France when his father passed away. So she was already now a queen.
Right. Now, her husband was called Louis le Jeune, the Young, but he was a very pious man and wasn't very interesting to her. She was this fiery woman with, passion and temper and a lust for power and this really sharp wit and intelligence. And this guy was a bit of a drip. I mean, he was not particularly skilled in the art of war. He was very much devoted to the church, and that was not his fault. He was raised as the second son to go into the church. Unfortunately for him, his elder brother died and he was suddenly given the crown, and he was wholly unprepared for this.
But he was besotted with Eleanor.
Shame, yeah. I mean, shame.
Yeah. So, and definitely she was the one forcing the annulment, although it was the fact that she couldn't give him a male heir. We're not sure what went on behind the scenes, but they did have 2 daughters, I believe.
Yeah.
But effectively, you're 100% right. She was, with her personality and the way she was, it was never going to work between the 2 of them.
Well, apparently the Pope had to actually force them to sleep together on their return from a part of the Second Crusade. They stopped off in Rome. She was looking to annul the marriage because she'd had enough of him. He just didn't do anything for her anymore. He blamed her for losing a very famous battle in the Holy Land on their way to Antioch. He also, there were rumors, there was gossip about her having an affair with her uncle Raymond in Antioch. Whether or not that's true, we'll never know. But what was interesting is that when they got to Rome, the Pope said he's going to bless them specially. He took them into a room where he'd prepared a big bed for them. He was basically saying, right, you two, get on with it. And they did. They did actually conceive a child. And she was born a little while later. But these 2 daughters are much more kind of mysterious because they fall out of history very quickly. And then it moves on, as did Eleanor very quickly.
Yeah, I think that Eleanor got a bad rep. So first of all, maybe the fact that she was sleeping with certain people. There was talk of her sleeping with William Marshall. He was the famous knight. And also with, like you said, Raymond. She spent a lot of time with Raymond. And then also Geoffrey of Aquitaine, Henry's father, Henry II, who we'll speak about just now. There was talk also about her having an affair of sorts with him. But as like a lot of the people that we've spoken about, it's very much down to who's written the story, and there's always some hidden agenda going on, and there's very little proof that any of these things did in fact happen.
Well, it's also typical of men at the time that whenever a woman was powerful or influential or seemed to have the upper hand, it must have been because she was sleeping with someone. And I think Eleanor comes off quite badly in the hands of medieval chroniclers, even though if you'd met her, you'd probably think this is not a woman who needs to sleep her way to the top. She had all the tools at her disposal and the brain to be able to figure out her way to the top without any of these guys even knowing what had hit them. And that brings us really to Henry, who I know is a favorite of yours in medieval kings, because he was every bit the king that England needed at the time. They'd come out of the Civil War. Henry II was this just unbelievably energetic human being. He could ride for days at a time on horseback. And of course, being here at one point and there at another made you just terrifying to people because they thought, how did he get here so quickly? They never knew where he'd pitch up. He had complete control of his kingdom. He was remorseless.
He was constantly on the move, highly energetic, a force of nature. He was called the Alexander of the West at times because of the vast lands that he'd owned or inherited, or he took it by a siege. So it's all the way from Scotland and the Highlands from Scotland all the way to the Pyrenees. But when he came, I think the realm just breathed a sigh of relief. Henry I, who was his grandfather, he had male heirs, but the male heir died in a shipwreck. And so the only real heir was Matilda, and she was feisty in herself, and she hung around quite a bit much later than Henry did, Henry I. Matilda was told by her father that she'd be the successor to his throne, but that never transpired. Stephen, who was a cousin of hers, got the throne. And there was civil war because a lot of the nobles didn't want him as king, etc., for whatever reasons. So it was a really difficult time for the realm. And when Henry came along, it just gave it the solidity. He cleaned things up very quickly. He was very, very astute in terms of law and administration, which we don't often talk about. We often talk about the warrior side. There's lots of things that he did at that time that are still relevant today.
Yeah, and he was an impressive guy. I mean, he was already, I think, 9 years younger than Eleanor when he married her. And they almost had to rush to do it because, again, there were all these men after her. And her whole life would be spent either running towards men, running away from men, or trying to manage men. And this was going to be accompanied by the fact that there were all these very, very strong male influences, but also people like Matilda, who was an example of, a woman who tried to hold her own at a time where those were very difficult things to do. She and he got along really well in the beginning. They produced, how many kids were there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 kids, which is absolutely amazing. She was a mother of 9 children. Now, if you think about it, these days we rightly are impressed by someone who can raise 3 or 4 kids. This woman had 9. Some of them were boys, and they fought with each other all the time, and she would sometimes take their sides, even against their father. But for a few years there, they had a happy marriage, and it seems they were genuinely in love. And while she probably influenced him in some ways, he also influenced her in some ways. But constantly keeping the borders of this enormous realm in play were, these were their preoccupations. This was a full-time job for Henry and for Eleanor.
They said he spent 14 years of his reign in England, which is fair enough because he owned half of France together with Eleanor. But that's only half of his reign. So he's just over 30 years, I think, was his reign. So he needed to spend time in his French territories as well as in England. And I think he just had the right amount of energy. And as you mentioned earlier, constantly on the move. He did everything on the move, and it worked.
They eventually called the empire that he ruled over the Angevin Empire. Anjou was where his father, Geoffrey of Anjou, was from, and they called it the Angevin Empire. He, partially controlled Scotland, the Duchy of Brittany, Ireland, much of territorial France, but he was only really accepted in the south of France because of Eleanor. She had to go out there and convince all of these vassals of hers that Henry was their boss as well, because without her, he wouldn't have had control over all of that. But there was constantly this tension between France and England. And the French crown, went from being very influential and powerful to being completely worthless at various stages through this up and down. And the king who eventually turned it around for France was Philippe Augustus, is who we call him. He took over after Eleanor's ex-husband, Louis VII, died. So it's hard to keep track of these things, but essentially what ended up happening was that Henry II and Eleanor's children eventually started to fight with each other and bicker, mostly the boys. The eldest of them who survived was Henry the Young King, who was this, again, perfect medieval king in some ways. You could joust, could fight, could lead an army to battle, but he was also a very vain, very proud, very spoilt little guy. And ultimately also started arguing with his father to the point where Henry II and he had so many arguments. He was traveling through southern France and caught dysentery and realized he was going to die. And the first thing he wanted to do after that was make up with his dad, because they'd been fighting for most of their adult lives.
I think the big thing that the sons had was that the dad was outwardly compliant, inwardly defiant. He had total control. He didn't want to release any control. And I think it was more them and then their mom standing by them rather than Eleanor actually acting against Henry II.
I think you're right to mostly absolve Eleanor of the blame, although Henry gave her most of the blame when he put her in prison in 1173, and he kept her in there for 15 years. And 15 years is not a short space of time.
No.
This woman wasn't kept in like a dungeon. She had her own household. She had a good living. She got lots of exercise. Was allowed to ride her horse around and hunt and do all the things that she'd done before. But she was estranged. She would be brought out for important family occasions and for Christmas and that sort of thing. And when Henry needed her to win over his barons in the south.
But there was also talk about her having the court of love. And I think that was just a little bit before she was locked up. But she was estranged by then, let's say, from Henry. And so she stayed in Poitiers and established together with her daughter a court where people could come and she would hear people's issues, etc., but a place of poetry, of love, of philosophy. And it became actually quite famous.
Do you think that Eleanor and Henry had a lifelong kind of love for each other? Because Henry definitely had other women and she'd obviously had other men both before him and we're not sure after. But they seem to have been like star-crossed lovers. In some ways they were fated to be together, even though they were both such powerful alpha human beings.
There's no doubt. I don't think that Henry could find anybody in his lifetime that could match Eleanor. And I think that Eleanor was satisfied, let's say, with Henry II. I mean, he was energetic. He had massive angers at times, but he never held grudges. He was stubborn, but intelligent. I think that there wasn't anybody on the planet that could satisfy any one of them but themselves.
Sure. So she did. You mentioned she already used to take the sides of some of her children. Her favorite was undoubtedly Richard. And Richard would end up taking over after Henry II died as King of England. And then obviously she'd already installed him as Duke of Aquitaine as well. So when he came along, it made sense for her to look after things for him. She'd been in prison in England for 15 years, which is more time than Henry II spent in England. So she knew the place, and she kind of took over as regent because all Richard wanted to do was go to the Crusades.
And it just shows you the relationship they had with their mom. There was so much talk that she was a bad mom. Just nipping back to the two daughters from Louis VII. Mm-hmm. Oh, but she didn't have a relationship. Well, she was not allowed to have a relationship. That's the way it worked in those days. That was not her property. Those two daughters were taken into the French court. So that wasn't any doing of hers. And then all of the sons, on young Henry's deathbed, he just wanted his dad to release Eleanor from prison. He wanted to release his mom from prison. Richard used her to run his realm while he was fighting the Crusades. And she was very instrumental during John's reign.
You know, we talked about William Marshall in a previous episode of Blind History, who was alive and around at the same time. And it just shows you that no man is an island, right? You have Henry II, Richard I, John, and all three of these kings rely not only on William Marshall in a big way, but all three of them also rely very heavily on Eleanor of Aquitaine.
Correct.
And she's this not so quiet influence in the background. You know, this powerful woman who has her own territories. She has her own reason to stand on her own 2 feet and not particularly care what these men are all up to. But she helps her sons in various ways in order to establish themselves as kings. And without her, Richard could never have run England from afar.
Her progeny were the three kings of England, right. Just her immediate progeny. So which was incredible and unusual at the time. But I think a big part of Henry was at least a little bit of balance in Henry's life, because Henry was impetuous. And I think that she did help. You said earlier, rightly so, that I don't think Henry could have got to the heights that he did if it wasn't for her. Besides the fact that Aquitaine was put under his realm, there was just so much more. And even the Thomas Becket saga, which I think is a very, very important thing that tarnished Henry II's reign. Thomas Becket was appointed by Henry as his chancellor. They were very, very close. Effectively, it was like, if we think of Queen Elizabeth now, it's her prime minister. But Henry made a mistake, I mean, in hindsight, in that he appointed him the Archbishop of Canterbury and expected Thomas Becket to toe the line like he'd done throughout his tenure as the chancellor. But what happened was Thomas Becket flipped 100%, did a 360-degree turn. There's discussions, reasons why. It was maybe he felt like he never belonged as an archbishop, as a man of the cloth, and he had to keep proving himself. So he became extremely dogmatic and vociferous in his protection of the cloth and everything to do with the Pope and religion.
Yeah, I think you've just illustrated such a good point, and maybe your theory is the right one, that he was trying to prove himself. But it's also that you have two bosses. You know, you have two gods that you report to as this lowly archbishop, because you've got a king in England and you've got the Pope in Rome. And there might have also been a little bit of pride. There might have also been advancement. You know, suddenly you're responsible to the head of the whole Catholic Church in Europe, and this is the way to your afterlife. And on the other hand, you've got Henry, who made the terrible mistake of one drunken night saying, "Will someone rid me of this turbulent priest?" And two of his knights who were in attendance heard this and thought, "Ha, we'll do that for you. We're drunk enough. We're loyal enough." They got on their horses, rode off to Canterbury, and slaughtered poor Thomas à Becket at the altar of Canterbury Cathedral. I mean,
while he was praying.
while he was praying, there's still a marker there to, he's a saint. He's regarded as the martyr, the first proper martyr of post 1066 England. And poor Henry never really got over this because he didn't hate Thomas. He certainly didn't want to murder him. It was a fit of drunken rage. He wasn't sure what role he'd played in it, and it seems to have had a terrible psychological influence and impact on him. After that, he became very pious, and he made all sorts of offerings and gave lots of lands back to the church and did all kinds of things that he might not have done if not for guilt. And all of this affected his reign too, because now he has no one he can rely on to run England. His wife is turning on him with his sons. His sons are all turning on each other and on him. He must have felt very lonely.
Historians are very harsh on him for that part of his reign and what happened. I think we'll never know, if he, behind closed doors, said we need to take him out. I think a lot of people believe that he didn't. But it was a big turning point. I think the big failures in his reign was the Archbishop of Canterbury's murder, and also the fact that his sons just didn't have a lot of love for their father.
No, and I think, some of them came round, and because he was such a powerful man, they fought and vied for his attention and affection a lot of the time. And maybe they didn't get enough of that. Maybe he was a terrible father. You could probably say Eleanor was a very good mother, and she stood by her sons, but she was also the only person who could ever stand up to Henry. He was so powerful. And ultimately they are buried next to each other in Fontevraud Abbey, which is, the effigies are still there despite, all those churches in France being looted during the Revolution. And these two effigies lie next to each other as if they still are in perfect harmony. Of course, we know that during life there was no harmony. Well, not for a very long time. So it's quite lovely to see these two unbelievably, what would you even call them? Just, you said earlier with Henry, a force of nature. I think they both were. And in all of their children, a little bit of that, power in that bloodline began with both of these two. And it may have been the source of so much of England's glory and so much of England's woes.
And the romantic in me hopes that they, that they did love each other. I saw The Lion in the Winter, that movie. You could see clearly in that they still loved each other. That they would scream and shout and rant and rave, but they did love each other. And they are, like you correctly have said, they're lying together. Actually, I think Richard was also, the effigy was also there, the three of them. And I think that's very special that they're there together.
Yeah, of course, they may have produced a line of incredible kings, including, the great Edward I and Edward III, possibly the greatest medieval kings. Henry II is among those number. But they also produced the worst: John, Richard II, Edward II. So this is the beginning of so many things that made Britain and before that England the amazing country that it is, and gave it this amazing history. So an incredible place to start. And the first real Plantagenet king being Henry II. It was the beginning of a dynasty that would last for hundreds of years.
There is people trying to find out the living Plantagenets, because it was such an incredibly powerful lineage.
And the name comes from a broom plant, and he used to wear a little twig of this broom plant in his hat, and the bloom is called the Plantagenista. So that's where it comes from, Plantagenista, Plantagenet. He was the first to use the surname, and the device, of course, of the three lions, which is still on the England cricket team's shirt. It's the Queen's coat of arms, and it became the coat of arms of the country of England. Those three lions, gold lions on the red background. That's Plantagenet. So that's where these two started their amazing dynasty.
And if you look at the size of his realm, that for me is something that's just incredible.
And it's also just worth saying again, because of Eleanor and her amazing influence on all of this, that even right at the end of her life, she was still trying to arrange dynastic marriages, and she went and fetched her granddaughter from Castile to bring her in to marry the new Dauphin of France. And this woman, just right up to her 82nd year, was still going strong.
82 years old in 1190 or whatever it was. It's just insane.
Phenomenal. That's them, Eleanor and Henry. Thanks for listening to this episode of Blind History. Every episode is available on the Cliff Central app, cliffcentral.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. In the next episode, he at one point was the richest man in the world. At one point, he was asked to help the US Air Force with plans for planes. He also slept with some of the most beautiful women in Hollywood. The guy just seems to have lived 10 lives in one.